Hi everybody, this is Worldmaker Books, and we are here for part 15 of reading through EarthSong Overture by Mark Wandry. Reminder one more time, we will have some signed giveaways available a little bit later in the process. My new computer is here and mostly working. I'm down to one monitor, so I'm trying to make everything work with one monitor. The part that I need for having a second monitor, which is sitting right here on my desk, is in the mail and won't be here until like the 21st or something like that. And it's painful in the meantime because I've gotten spoiled. I do so much with two monitors that it's like, really? I really can't have another monitor right now? And then there's fluff all over my desk and sewing projects and crochet projects and everything. Everything. I have a big crochet project I have to finish before Sunday. And hopefully I can get that done. Trying to get the body of this thing stuffed. It's not going to work with that. Let's see if this will do the trick. There's a reason I have a huge basket of pens and knitting needles and scissors and all sorts of tools right over here on my desk, because I really couldn't live without them at close hand. We generally wait until about 5 after 8 to start the reading, just to let people get here in case people are running late, because, you know, that happens to all of us. And in the meantime, I'm going to keep stuffing these mystery pieces parts. Something I didn't find any patterns I liked for this creature. So I took the pictures I was given and made a pattern. So we'll see. I think the person who ordered them is going to like them. They're going to look just as close to the pictures as I could possibly manage. I don't have a whole one finished yet, but rest assured I will take photographs and make posts on the Book of Faces when I get them all done. Some of you are probably going to want some. Probably also going to, for those crocheters in the crowd, make the pattern available for purchase. So if you want to make your own, you'll be able to do that. But first, I have to get these 3 done. I have all the projects laying out here, just waiting for me to get to them. Been working nonstop almost, it seems, trying to get all the stuff done. It's always this way in December. It really shouldn't be December yet. I know it's the 15th. I know it's the 15th. I don't think so.
Well, I mean, that's the best I get at 1080.
Here, let me. Is that better? Not really? Hang on a minute. Oh, that may be. Let me check and see if there's anything I can do about that. Customization, details. I don't see where I can control that. Not for the
Well, it's better now.
live. Really
Yeah.
weird.
Could be our reception again now.
Could be because the weather's been kind of iffy.
Possibly.
I had problems like that earlier this afternoon on my video call. So, when there's heavy weather, there's
Be careful of that one working too.
yeah.
No outages shown.
No what outages?
Yeah.
That's good.
Speed test says 20 minutes. You're not doing great.
Yeah, it's the weather. It's a cloud cover probably. I mean, that's all I can think it would be.
Right.
So here in just a couple minutes, we will get started with reading. In the meantime, I am just stuffing these things. Look, little bits of cloud. Why is my camera so... Oh, I turned it sideways a little bit. There, that's better. That's better. Look, I'm actually like centered. Oh my gosh. And you don't need to see the here. Look, that's a second one stuffed. 1 and 2 are now stuffed. Yay. Let's get 3. See if we can get a little bit of that stuffed. Maybe. Maybe. Oh, somebody's here. Probably you. All right. 8:02. Gonna give it a couple more minutes. When sorry, distracted by trying to stuff this stupid thing. When you first join in, please say something. Say hi. That way we have some idea who's here. And if you, now that Mark is working from home, he is almost always going to be here. So if you have questions, feel free to ask. 8:03. 2 more minutes, guys. Trying to let some people show up. In the meantime, you just get to listen to me ramble. Sorry. Derp, really, Mark?
That's all I got.
I don't know what to do with him, you guys. I really don't. Okay. Putting all of this aside. Get a drink of water. Get my fidget putty. It's stuck to the lid this time. Okay. Osgood was stuck and didn't know what else to do. There wasn't really anything he could do. So he opened up a bottle of beer from the little refrigerator under his desk and started drinking. And it was still morning, but it was all he could think of to do. So that's where we ended. There was a chapter break right there. And let's continue. Volant was close enough to yell at Osgood in his trailer and be heard, but he preferred watching and listening to the geek scientist via the numerous surveillance devices in the man's trailer. Volant had spent many hours since the mysterious event took place, being very careful to tell his boss no more than he needed to. What a shit sandwich, he said to the darkened trailer, shutters and only the multiple computer monitors casting light. He'd done nothing in the last 24 hours except analyze data, watch videos, review emails, and read analysis from NSA specialists working on the project. General absenteeism from government positions had been growing in double-digit increments the last 3 days. The NSA was one of the few organizations with more than 90% of its employees still showing up for work. The main facility in Maryland was fully staffed, partly through reductions in field staff. A presidential order came out late the night before that effectively put most federal law enforcement personnel on crowd control and disaster response. The NSA responded by buttoning up most of their people into the Maryland compound to avoid notice. The latest email from his boss cut to the chase. Volant, I need oxygen, and I need it now. He sighed and flexed his left hand, doing the exercises the doctor gave him. The arm hurt less, and he could feel his flexibility increasing. The doctor was due to take the cast off in another week, but by then it would all be over. A visitor was coming in 6 days. He looked at some of the intel one last time. A particularly damning piece was the material movements occurring under a manufactured account. He'd traced the name and found it didn't match an actual person and had only appeared a few days ago. He hit reply and started typing. My conclusion is as follows. The reply was as succinct as his boss's demand. He stared at it for a full minute, his mouse hovering over the send button. God only knew the shitstorm he was unleashing with this email. He hit the button. He wouldn't see the real damage for a few days. Come on. Okay, there's a chapter break there. In Virginia, a program monitoring traffic across the internet picked up an encrypted message from one flagged account to another flagged account. It was routed to a decryption team marked with highest priority. Minutes later, a supercomputer crushed the code and broke the encryption. A coordinator deep in the bunker under the building received the message while he was in mid-conference with several other people. He took one look at the email, and that was all he needed. Gentlemen, we have to act now, he said. They stared at each other for a second. I'll have the planes in the air in 15 minutes, one of them said. I'll be on a chopper in that time, another said. We'll coordinate when we're in the air, the recipient of the intercepted message said. In seconds, he was riding an elevator up to the roof where a helicopter was waiting. At a secure airport only a few miles away, hundreds of men. Another chapter break there. The guards at the entrance checked Mindy's ID before desultorily waving her through. That, more than the lack of any real work, was the worst sign she'd seen. Inside, there were no staff. The various scientific implements sat idle, and only a couple of lights were on. The dais appeared unchanged from the last time she'd been here. She walked up to the dais, stopping just short to look around. No one stopped her, so she put a foot on the bottom step. It instantly sprang to life. That's not the same place, she said, looking at the nearly dark portal. There was a hint of light from the other side, though only a hint. She walked across to one of the light stands that hung over the dais, aimed it toward the portal, and flipped it on. The light revealed a rock or stone wall on the other side. That is not the same place, she said again, craning her neck to see as far sideways on the other side as she could. The wall was built of cut stone, she was sure, and it went in both directions as far as she could tell. Had the people on Bellatrix built a building around the portal? They couldn't have built that so quickly, she said aloud just as the portal shut down. She started. It hadn't been 10 minutes. No, they didn't. Mindy jumped, spinning around to see Osgood standing by the door. He had a beer bottle in one hand and looked a little unsteady on his feet. He pointed with the hand holding the bottle. Someone appeared a few days ago, and he gestured at the portal, which had reappeared after she jumped, something she didn't know was possible. Reprogrammed it, I guess you could say. He drained his beer and tossed the empty bottle toward the nearest trash bin, missing by feet. The bottle rebounded off the metal floor and rolled under a machine. He took no notice. She looked back at the portal and the stone wall. She'd known from the crypto group's emails that something drastic had happened. She'd only come here out of desperation to find out. This wasn't what she'd expected, not at all. It's not like Bellatrix, Osgood said, again gesturing at the portal. The atmosphere is all wrong. The radiation and temps are too high. He burped and leaned against an instrument panel that threatened to topple over. He straightened up and glared at it as though the furniture had somehow done it on purpose. You said someone did this? Mindy asked. She felt she wasn't convincing, but Osgood was too drunk to see through her. Yeah, an older woman appeared in the dome and changed the portal. He mimed pushing buttons, then did a surprisingly good imitation of the video Mindy had watched. Poof! No more escape. Mindy gawked. Have you seen the lights? He pointed to the perimeter of the dais. Once there had been 144 lights, with several out. Now they were all there, but none were lit. A soldier went through, so it still works. But he disappeared, and we haven't heard from him again. Maybe monsters ate him. He shrugged and turned to go. What now? Mindy asked. Osgood kept walking, so she shouted after him, Can I try to fix it? Sure, he said, walking out. Why not? A moment later, he was gone from sight, leaving Mindy alone in the dome. She spent the rest of the day examining the symbols and their movement up close. With no one to watch her, she could experiment and didn't have to conceal what she'd learned from eavesdropping on the crypto team's efforts. Of course, nothing generated results. Some of the symbols did flash when she touched them, but that was the limit of the effect. It was hours later when she returned to her bunkhouse. Everyone else was already asleep or getting ready for bed. In the small work area, she got her computer out and made some notes. Mindy included a small diary entry about the extinguished lights, noting that there no longer appeared to be a limit to the number of transits before she signed off for the night. She stowed the computer in her locker under the bunk, so she didn't notice when it booted itself up in the wee hours of the morning, located a nearby secure network connection, and exploited a built-in backdoor to establish a remote connection and download everything she'd just done to the FBI's data farm. The download finished in minutes, and the computer dutifully erased all evidence of the event and went back to sleep. Chapter break. And new chapter. Chapter 25, May 16. The next morning, Mindy was at the dome bright and early. The mood in the camp was decidedly somber and disorganized. She could see the perimeter, a line of M1 tanks spaced every 100 feet, though there were only a few NSA types milling around. No one seemed to know what to do. The guard waved her into the dome, looking at her badge. As before, the dome was empty, no sign of Dr. George Osgood, drunk or sober. Mindy walked over to the portal dais. Nothing appeared to have changed from the night before. She had her tablet with her, on which she had made some notes, and an MRE. The previous night, an NSA agent brought a box of MREs to their bunkhouse. When they asked him what those were for, he informed them that the cafeteria had closed due to lack of staff and supplies, divided the MREs evenly among themselves. She'd eaten MREs on a couple of remote astronomy trips. They didn't taste great, but they were filling and had their own heaters. All you needed was water, and the water in their trailer still worked, unlike the internet. When she woke up, she found there was no internet service. After checking, she found a local network was still up, mirroring the government's feed, but the rest of the internet backbone was down. There were several news stories about major disorder in cities all over the planet. A few fires still smoldered on Wall Street, which rioters had all but burned to the ground before the meager police presence managed to drive off the rioters. Luckily, she had already archived the research she was doing on the local servers, and the government connection with a team of cryptologists was being maintained on government internet services separate from the public internet. Armed with her notes, Mindy began trying some of the touch combinations she thought might work. After learning that she could activate the portal by simply jumping on the dais, it became easier to deal with a 2-minute window. Within an hour, the confidence she started the morning with had completely dried up. Nothing she did worked. It was slow going. Because the symbols rotated, she had to wait for up to a minute for the right one to show up so she could tap it and freeze the movement. When she finally stopped around noon, her arms hurt from reaching, touching, and gesturing. All her work appeared to be for nothing. She sat on the end of the dais and cooked the MRE, using water from a bottle she'd brought with her. The beef stew wasn't bad, but it was kind of glutinous. This one came with brownie bites for dessert. As she ate, she considered the 10 people already on the other side of the portal on Bellatrix. They only had limited supplies and ammo to deal with the dinosaurs. She hoped they were getting on okay. Chapter break. Sergeant Lisa Simpson watched the portal dais idly as she ate her meal. Before the portal stopped working 5 days ago, they'd been subsisting on rations brought from Earth. After 48 hours of no contact, they'd started adding cloth meat to their meals. Now, 5 days in, Abbott and Edwin were competing to add local flora and fauna to their diet. The meal she ate consisted almost entirely of local plants and animals, though she added earth salt, pepper, and barbecue sauce. The cloth had a hard to describe gaminess to it. It was chewy, too. No sign of life? She turned and saw the big Aussie biologist, Steve Edwin. He was casually picking bits of cloth gristle from his teeth. No, she admitted, but I keep watching. They don't send more ammo, we're buggered, he added. She grunted. There wasn't anyone at Fort Eden who didn't know that. I'm off in an hour, he said, gesturing to one of the Puma drones resting in a backpack. It's all charged again. She was glad. His constant efforts to get in her pants were a little boorish. For her, the reason to hope contact resumed was more than ammo and food. As the only woman on the planet with 9 men, her future didn't look attractive. Hope you can figure out where the cloth are coming from. Edwin grunted and nodded. We'll nut out where they're coming from, he said. Lisa gave him a sidelong glance. Nut out? She asked. She suspected nut didn't mean the same thing where she came from. Means work it out, he told her, and she nodded. A minute later, Darrell Abbott came over. It appeared the British explorer was sharing his skill set, but that was not the reality. Abbott was more of a gentleman explorer, used to having all kinds of support and modern tools within close reach, not to mention camera crews. Edwin, on the other hand, was often dropped off in the middle of nowhere with some survival gear and a camera. While Abbott was increasingly regretting his decision to come, Edwin was in his element. I suppose we're ready to go on bloody safari again, Abbott reluctantly asked his forced partner. That would be Ripper, Edwin said, and grabbed his Bergara rifle. He already had his Webley pistol strapped on. Lieutenant Colonel Wilson walked up quickly. You forgot your rifle, Mr. Abbott, he said, and held out the rifle. It was one of the expedition's 4 Remington 700 rifles chambered in .30-06. Abbott's eyes narrowed. Or did you violate camp rules and forget it on purpose? Just an oversight, Abbott said, and took the weapon. He held it like someone would hold a live snake. He slipped the sling over one shoulder and his pack over the other. Lisa watched them move off together and hoped they'd survive long enough to get some answers. I hope Edwin doesn't cap the limey, Wilson said. Lisa didn't say anything, even though she agreed. Okay, there's another chapter break. Get a drink real quick. Mindy went back to the shared office space for a few hours late in the afternoon. She'd gotten nowhere with the portal, not even gaining any insights. Still, she had gotten some hands-on time with the portal, and she now understood how it took input. She marveled at the device and became more convinced its origin was other than human. She had entered many generic reminders in her computer's calendar, set to make sure she didn't leave any of her hacking tools on the machine. She checked the progress of the movement. What? She checked the progress of the movement of the equipment she'd requested and gasped when she saw how much had occurred without her monitoring it. 2 of the warehouses she'd specified were unavailable due to rioting, so a lot of the goods she requested were moved to the portal camp. Those supplies appeared to be stowed in the vacuum-formed crates designed to go through the portal. Mindy had a few moments of panic when she saw all of this taking place without any input from her. She'd set up a sort of perpetual motion machine, it seemed. She was certain someone should have noticed what was going on, as it was almost the only work occurring as far as she could see. Maybe a bunch of bored people had grasped onto something to do. She used her toolkit from the flash drive to make a few more modifications, hoping it would tamp things down and decrease the chances of anything coming apart while she was busy. It took her almost an hour. As it was getting late, she ate a protein bar from her desk. Cooked anything, even an MRE, in the trailer would have been too disruptive. Once she was done, she stashed the flash drive back in the desk with all the other junk and headed out. It had rained that morning, and now the evening was cool and humid. A fog hovered over the park, making the nearby Central Park West high-rises almost invisible. A distinct smell of smoke was in the air. Mindy noticed there were only a few distant sirens. A few days ago, she would have thought things would have calmed down by now, but she knew that was unlikely after talking to Detective Harper. She thought about the radio stashed in her backpack. Maybe she'd give him a call tonight. As she was walking along the trampled, dew-soaked grass, Mindy noticed a solitary figure emerging from the portal dome. She could just make out the cast on the man's left arm and realized it was Volant, the NSA agent with considerable power. She'd avoided him as much as possible. Her position was tenuous enough without crossing his path. She dropped back behind one of the many generator-powered floodlights scattered around the camp as he walked past the sole dome guard and past a line of trailers until he was out of sight. Mindy didn't know why, but she felt her feet taking her toward the portal dome. Just before she reached it, the guard noticed her, recognized her, and lost interest. She walked inside to find it empty. The portal was active, much to her amazement. She glanced back toward the door and the now departed Agent Volant, wondering what he'd been up to. The portal disappeared a second later. She spent a few minutes walking around the dome, examining the equipment and surroundings for any sign of use. Nothing was evident. Then she climbed the dais and examined the portal when it came to life. There, too, she found nothing different. What were you doing in here? She wondered aloud. The quiet hum of cooling fans on machinery was the only answer. The portal shut off after 2 minutes, and she sat down on the edge. She yawned as she tried to figure out what was going on and eventually gave up and stared at the dais. Milky, translucent, and as smooth as glass, it was hard to believe it was a force field, like the scientists said. It barely held in check power so immense that its unleashing had killed millions, almost billions. She leaned closer and examined the dimly perceived motions inside. It's really beautiful, she said to the empty dome. Mindy wondered if the beauty was from alien aesthetics or a side effect of the engineering that went into building an intergalactic gateway between worlds. She rolled sideways so she was lying on the surface of the dais, her head propped up on her elbows, and stared into it, amazed she'd never done this before. She could almost imagine the coalescing patterns of deep space nebula or primordial nurseries full of stars about to be born. She felt her mind swirling like those patterns. If you don't get up, you're going to fall asleep here, she heard some part of her mind say. But she didn't really care. She hadn't slept well in days, weeks, really. Staring into the portal was ever so relaxing and peaceful. And then she fell through into oblivion. Mindy was floating between the stars, a being of infinite size and dimensions. She could reach out with a hand and touch a nearby star, or cradle a black hole in her cupped hands, watching it hungrily ingest a world. With a thought, she was half a galaxy away, seeing two far-flung empires tearing at each other with inconceivable weapons, laying waste to entire star systems in their rage. Then she was looking down upon a world inhabited by quiet, peaceful, living trees that could whisper to their kind a million light years away. She saw everything. Something floated out of the infinite toward her. Mindy felt her consciousness focus on it. The shape was indistinct, as if it didn't quite exist. It would have done a Hollywood special effects studio justice. It seemed to be a cross between a crab and a spider that somehow exuded a sense of being and intelligence, and a symmetry only a real, living creature possessed. At the front of its body was a shape she thought of as a head, and on the head were 5 very human-like eyes, all looking at her. A pair of elongated pincers ended in another set of pincers, and another, and another. Mindy's mind reeled as she tried to focus on the infinite. She pulled back, in real danger of losing herself in the anomaly. "What are you?" she asked. "We are," it replied. Somehow, that it spoke English didn't surprise her, despite her mind screaming that this dream was getting way out of control. Her higher thought processes knew it was much more than a dream. "You have Will R calling us. We have Will R here." "I don't understand," she said. They regarded each other for a moment, then it spoke again. "You recognize now. We have Will did fix this paradox." And with blinding speed, one of those infinite pincers shot out and through her brain. Mindy screamed, and her being was torn asunder. Chapter break. Osgood spent 4 hours in a conference call carried over military satellite internet links. The civilian internet backbone had failed the previous night. Panic was spreading like wildfire throughout the country. He didn't notice or care beyond the fact that the internet failure was hampering his efforts to solve the portal problem. He'd talked to an army captain in charge of the tanks guarding Central Park, who bumped him up to a colonel he'd never met, who made a couple of calls. An anonymous corporal later delivered a little black box with a power supply and a single Ethernet cable port. When plugged into power and his computer, Osgood could reach out once more. He didn't know how, and he didn't really care. He shared the connection through the local network with Skinner a few hours ago when the other men complained he was having a similar problem. Figuring they were both working toward the same end, Osgood decided it made sense to share the connection and make his work easier. The email he'd been reading included a video recording from one of 4 teams now working on the portal issue. The video was a cooperative effort from a group at MIT working with interpretive dance students at Juilliard who were under lockdown because of the crisis. He almost sent a pissed off reply until he read the conclusions. Quickly, he went back and started over. Good Lord, he hissed, they might be onto something. It involved rhythms and recurring incidents of the number 12, which was the square root of 144. There had to be some significance to that number sequence. He watched and read the entire presentation several times, then grabbed his phone to call the team together. The phone didn't work. Damn it, he cursed and rose to his feet, groaning, his back sore from hours of hunching over the computer. He forced himself into motion, pulling open the door and hobbling down the stairs. As he walked toward the other trailer 100 yards away, he became aware of several things at once. One, he heard the near-distant and unmistakable sound of helicopters. 2, he heard panicked shouts. 3rd, he heard several sharp coughing sounds, then a scream. He froze. Another attack? Several dozen figures dressed in black rushed toward the portal dome. He started to yell at them just as the lone guard, who'd been looking around for the source of the commotion, noticed them. The guard barked an order and clawed at his sidearm. An instant later, he was chopped down by more coughing sounds. Silenced weapons, Osgood realized. An alarm sounded, a brutally loud buzzer, and everything descended into total anarchy. Within seconds, a pair of helicopters swooped in, Blackhawks nearly invisible in the dark, and dozens of men streaked down ropes falling from their sides. Dozens of NSA agents opened fire with pistols and rifles. Osgood stood in the middle of a lane between rows of trailers for a long moment as a multi-sided gun battle began to develop. He froze in place, uncertain what to do, when something hit him in the left shoulder. The impact spun him around, and he landed on the ground, face first. His chin hit the metal grating used for the pathways, and he felt teeth break. He lay there for several moments, dimly aware that his left shoulder was numb, thinking someone must have punched him. He had pull up on his right side because his left arm didn't want to work. He looked down and saw a red stain spreading on his white lab coat. I've been shot, he realized in stunned amazement. Osgood didn't really know what to do, but he was certain that sitting there on the ground with bullets flying around him wasn't a good solution, so he struggled to his feet. He found he was more than a little dizzy as he looked around for somewhere to run. 2 men in blacked-out uniforms ran up to him. There were places on their chests where patches used to be, and both wore intricate harnesses. You know this one of them asked the other. I'm Osgood, he said quickly. Take me to Volant. He looked toward Volant's trailer, out of the view behind others. He could hear gunfire over there, too. He's on the list, the other said, nodding his head. Right, the first one said. Osgood looked back at the 2 men and into the barrel of a handgun. But Osgood started to complain, and then he was no more. Chapter break. What do you want us to do? The army captain demanded. Volant resisted the urge to punch the man. He'd run all the way to the Army Command Center from his trailer after he'd ordered his agents to create a perimeter around their area of the camp. The assault had been completely unexpected. These weren't his superiors and their people, who were still hours away. Force was out at LaGuardia, making sure the airport could handle the inbound transport's arrival. Like the rest of the city's services, the airports were barely functioning. Stranded travelers filled the airports, as many airlines were unable to get even... Oh, all right. Like the rest of the city's services, the airports were barely functioning. Stranded travelers filled the airports, as many airlines were unable to get even one flight off the ground. I already told you, he said, his jaw muscles clenching and unclenching. This is some rogue element of the government. They don't have insignia, and we weren't told they were coming. The 24 M1 Abrams battle tanks were his key to holding the compound, but the military was recalcitrant to enter the fray. Sorry, guys, I don't know what the problem is between my brain and my mouth today. Their chain of command was broken in many places. Since arriving to provide security, they hadn't moved. I already told you We don't have any orders beyond providing security, the captain replied. Booming shots and screams echoed from the camp, and Volant cursed. So, unless you have. The captain didn't finish the sentence because two tanks further down Fifth Avenue exploded with a thunderous crash. Pieces of steel and armor flashed through the night. Volant heard a thwipping sound and felt a sting on his right cheek. He reached up and felt wet blood and a tiny gash. He'd come within a few inches of dying. Is that good enough for you? He barked at the captain. Get off my fucking tank, the man yelled and slammed the cupola closed. Volant got off the side of the tank as best as he could manage. It was even harder for a one-handed man to climb down from an 8-foot tall tank than it had been to climb up onto it in the first place, but he'd gotten tired of yelling up to the smarmy captain, so there he was. As he slid down the side, the whine of the tank's Honeywell turbine engine coming to life got louder and louder. He sped up his efforts and almost fell when he got to the ground, quickly moving to the side as the tank came to life and the treads started churning the already mangled sidewalk. A missile obliterated another tank. A flashing rocket contrail linked dead tank to the roof of a condo along Fifth Avenue. Just above the roof was a barely visible Apache attack chopper. He maneuvered through hell as the portal camp turned into a ball of flaming death all around him. His Sig Sauer P-220 was in his right hand, and he was dearly missing his left. He'd never been an accomplished single-handed shooter. As he drove into the fray and ran toward the portal dome, he shot targets of opportunity and hid as bigger groups of unknowns in blacked-out uniforms moved about. He had almost reached his objective, where his men would be, when he found he needn't go any further. His men were all dead, their bodies piled up like a cord of wood. Fuckers, Volant cursed quietly, then pulled back behind a garbage dumpster next to an office trailer as a pair of raiders went by. He saw something as they passed. One of the men had neglected to remove the logo from his black camo. FBI was clearly visible. Thunderous explosions and the roar of turbine engines echoed nearby as the army slugged it out with the attacking helicopters. Volant knew enough about military tactics to know that without support, the tanks faced tough odds against the attack choppers. Cannon shots tore up million-dollar condos all over the richest real estate in the United States. A few sirens sounded. He doubted any would get close until the fighting was over. Freeze, he heard behind him, followed by the sound of a bolt slamming home. He sighed and stood up, dropping his beloved Sig to the ground and raising his hands above his head before turning around. A pair of FBI agents were pointing M5 carbines at his chest. What's your name? One of them asked. Fuck yourself. The man raised the gun to get a better aim. Mark Volant, Assistant Section Director, NSA. Thought he looked familiar, the other said. Cuff him, he told his partner. The man came over and expertly cuffed Volant's hands behind his back. Volant cooperated. He didn't want them messing with his screwed-up wrist. Cuffs won't fit over the cast, the one who held him said. You stripper, dipshit, the other said. Volant managed to hide his smile. A few minutes later, they escorted him into the portal dome where dozens of agents were on guard, examining equipment or gawking at the portal. Clearly, none of them understood why they were here. The agent who'd first talked to Volant spoke to an agent by the door, and a moment later he was face to face with the head honcho. It wasn't who he'd been expecting. Volant, I'm surprised you're still alive, the man said. Assistant Director Adams was about the same rank in the FBI as Volant was in the NSA. Adams, Volant said, carefully flexing his bound hands. I figured someone would be pulling your strings. I can tell which way the wind is blowing, the other man said. Intel has been spying on everything since this thing showed up, he said, and hooked a thumb at the portal. You're letting us do the HRT gig gave us a lot of good intel, too. Then you pulled that diversion pretending the portal was broken, and I saw my chance. Volant stopped and looked at him closer. So you're sure it's a fake issue? Of course, Adams said. Some mysterious girl appears and manipulates an alien artifact? He laughed out loud, shaking his head. Come on, Volant, even you don't believe. I thought better of a sneaky spy cocksucker like you. The sound of multiple helicopters interrupted them. The distant thundering booms of the tank's main guns had ceased a few minutes before. He had no idea who'd won, if anyone. I see everyone is arriving, Adams said, rubbing his hands together. What is your plan, if you don't mind my asking? Adams regarded him like he would a bug that crawled unexpectedly onto your dinner plate. We're getting off this planet before it explodes. or whatever the eggheads say is going to happen. He gestured vaguely up at the sky, though you couldn't see it through the concrete. The cosmic lawn dart looks way too much like a bullet. He seemed to consider for a minute. I do believe some bug-eyed monster planned to kill us, and another bug-eyed monster left the portals so we can get away. It's all very cosmic. Yeah, Volant said, continuing to work his arm. A cosmic joke. He glanced at the portal dais and for the first time noticed a body lying on it. It was that red-headed astronomer chick. You guys cap her? She just another egghead? Adams turned around, seemingly noticing the body for the first time. He glanced at one of his henchmen, who shook his head. Go check her out, he ordered. One of his team, probably a medic, moved over to examine the body. He felt her neck, then rolled her over to further examine her before speaking. She's alive, he said, but only barely. She's bleeding from her ears. If I had to guess, I'd say head trauma. Adams gestured, and two men carried the unconscious woman off the dais and out of sight. Bullet heard the dull thud of a body hitting the floor. He wondered where Skinner and Osgood might be and was surprised neither of them were there. In fact, he had thought they were involved in this setup. He finally asked. Osgood was liquidated, Adams said with a shrug. He knew too much and was too well connected in Washington. Bullet admitted to himself he was surprised how far the FBI man had gone. We couldn't find Skinner. He was probably off-site when we struck. Another pair of agents came in and spoke quietly to Adams, who seemed pleased. Now, if you'll excuse me, he said to Volant, and nodded to one of the guards. Are you going to kill me now? He asked the FBI man. Nah, Adams said with a wink. Professional courtesy. You're going to sit over there out of the way and watch while we evacuate. If you do as you're told, Agent Coopersmith won't put a 10-millimeter round through your brain. Deal? Bullet didn't need to consider his options. He walked over to where Adams indicated and sat on the crate. An agent, no doubt Coopersmith, walked over to stand next to him. Bullet noted the man left his weapon holstered and the thumb brake in place over it. Adams watched until he was satisfied, then nodded. A short time later, dozens of men began arriving and stacked hundreds of Pelican cases next to the portal. Bullet felt a grin spread across his face. While he wasn't sure what had happened to the portal, he'd seen the changes firsthand. He did as he was told and watched, flexing his arms every few minutes. It took them an hour to get organized and ready, giving Volant time to admire the job they were doing. The buffoons had been planning this for weeks, and here they were, wandering around, bumping into each other like pigeons in a park. Once they were finally ready, the first agent walked onto the dais. It was completely dark on the other side of the portal, making the man pause. There was some discussion while he grabbed a flashlight, even though a half-dozen LED light stands sat unused next to the portal. The man standing on the dais used the flashlight to examine the other side until, after 2 minutes, the portal shut down. Bullet could pick out those who'd received the most intel. They were the ones with their jaws hanging open in surprise. It took another 10 minutes for them to realize they needed to get off the dais before it would reset. All the while, Volant was mentally keeping track of how long it had been and estimating travel time. When they finally sent the first person through, 2 hours had passed since the initial attack. Volant noted the man carried a rifle and a shoulder bag with unknown gear, nothing more. He was through a full 30 seconds before 2 men stumbled up the dais stairs with a pair of Pelican cases which they unceremoniously threw at the portal, only for them to rebound and crash to the ground. If anything, they were more surprised now than they'd been when the portal turned off prematurely. Several more minutes of loud arguments ensued. Bullet watched carefully, keeping quiet, counting time's passage. He knew it had to be soon. They reactivated the portal and saw the man he'd gone through, standing on the other side with a confused look on his face. Bullet guessed that the FBI either didn't know about the laser communicator or decided not to use it. They communicated for a minute with crude hand signals. 2 minutes later, a second person went through, then a third, and a fourth. It wasn't until the fourth passed through that they realized each person going through could do so carrying as many crates as they could handle. They lost more time trying to find some rope to rig slings so they could carry even more crates. As the dog and pony show proceeded, Volant counted at 3 helicopters landing. Clearly, these clowns had planned on a rapid transition of hundreds through the portal instead of the 5 they'd managed in 2.5 hours. A team of men tied a dozen pelican cases together with rope, so each man going through the portal could carry as many crates as he could stumble with. More time passed before they realized stacking these linked crates up on the dais allowed each person to carry more, as they didn't have to stumble up the steps with their load. It's like watching monkeys try to solve a puzzle, Volant thought. 40 men passed through the portal before Volant saw the first woman. He took a quick look around the crowded dome and saw 5 or 6 out of the dozens there. Thinking back to the scientists' discussion about colony viability, he shook his head slightly. If the NASA eggheads were lying and that was the same world, they were dooming themselves by transitioning too few women and too many men. As another chopper landed, a huge explosion rocked the dome. Unlike their reactions to the surprises from the portal, the FBI agents instantly sprang into action. Sorry, you guys. A combat team detached itself and raced outside. There was another explosion and gunfire erupted. Hurry up, Adams barked at the groups moving through the portal. But without the practice Osgood's teams had, they kept getting in each other's way. Progress inside slowed considerably, while the battle outside escalated rapidly. Adams became increasingly agitated at the lack of progress in moving people through, as well as the inability of his men outside to win the battle. Then something went wrong. A runner arrived, holding a bloody wound dressing against his arm. A dozen women followed, all injured to one degree or another. The last 3 were practically carrying each other. 4 men escorted the women, all of them wounded as well. That's all? Adams barked. None of the men would look him in the eye. Finally, one of the agents who'd caught Volant spoke up. They hit all 3 Blackhawks, the man said. Only one managed to land. All the passengers aboard the others were killed. Volant realized the passengers in those helicopters were women, so Adams was aware that he didn't have enough women. He now had about 20. The magnitude of the disaster was clear on his face. 2 more men ran into the dome, and for the first time, bullets bounced off the concrete. Volant leaned forward slightly, watching. The men who ran in yelled that the perimeter had collapsed. Everyone, let's go, Adams barked. Grab as many cases as you can and get through the damn thing. He pointed at the stack of crates and the portal in turn. Go, go, go! People started to move, the women going first. Hold the door, Adams added, snapping at several men close to it. The men standing next to Volant detached his M4 carbine from the strap around his neck and turned toward the door, which was exactly what Volant had been waiting for. With a grunt and a twist, he separated the stripper cuff holding his wrists. He felt the skin tear on his right wrist, but ignored it. As he broke the cuff, he got to his feet and brought the cast-covered arm up across the back of the FBI man's head. Volant almost bit through his lip as pain exploded through his arm from the impact. The FBI man gave an almost comical grunt as he began to fall face first toward the ground, unconscious. Volant grabbed the carbine by the adjustable butt plate, jerking it free from the collapsing man, flipped it around and found the pistol grip. Bracing the front grip against the cast on his extremely painful left arm, he swung the weapon around. He trusted the FBI's training to be as good as he'd heard, flipped the selector from safe, past single, and onto full auto before pulling the trigger. The 5.56 millimeter assault rifle was unbelievably loud in the enclosed space as he dumped the entire 30-round magazine in a long, sustained burst. Working the weapon through the crowd of FBI agents trying to wrangle themselves, injured women, and crates through the portal. The magazine emptied and he pulled his finger out of the trigger guard to pop the release, dropping to a knee and snatching another magazine from the fallen agent's web gear. At over 800 rounds per minute, he'd burned through that magazine in just over 2 seconds. 10 people were screaming, falling, or dead in that 2 seconds. If Volant had been on his own, everything would have been over in another couple of seconds. The sudden gunfight in the dome distracted the guards, which gave Volant's people the opening they needed to rush the entrance. Volant rolled, his injured left hand making the magazine swap clumsy and slow. It took twice as long to load the second magazine as it had to empty the first. By the time he did, it seemed like almost everyone in the dome was firing at him. Bullets wanged off the concrete wall, blew through computers, exploded equipment, and ricocheted everywhere. A squad of NSA agents rushed in, trying to dive for cover. Several were gunned down immediately. FBI agents were grabbing crates and diving through the portal. Bullet shot 2 in the back as they tried to escape. Then a bullet found him, punching cleanly through the left side of his chest, just below the nipple. Oh, he gasped, the impact causing him to stagger, knocking his breath out. He fell back onto his butt and shook his head to clear it. The the last the last dozen or so FBI agents were falling back toward the portal, Adams in their midst. Several were trying to take crates with them. Bullet struggled to his feet, and with a roar, he fired. Adams spotted him and yelled back, firing his Glock as quickly as he could pull the trigger. Bullet felt a round hit him in the stomach and another in the shoulder. He staggered, but kept his feet under him. "Fuck you, you prick!" he screamed at Adams, shifting his aim and squeezing the trigger. Just then, a round from Adams' Glock took the top off Bullet's head. Bullet's finger spasmed on the trigger, firing the remaining rounds in a long burst, which stitched Adams from crotch to face. The gunfire went on. With no one in charge on either side, the FBI fell back through the portal. NSA agents arrived just in time to see the portal deactivate. As their boss was dead, they did the only thing they could think of. They raced up the dais, activated the portal, and ran after the fleeing FBI to continue the battle. Around the portal, the battle continued until there was no one left to fight. All right, there's a chapter break. I think we're going to go one more section here. Sergeant Lisa Simpson's hands felt raw as she struggled to pull a log the last few yards through the mud. The rain hadn't stopped for 2 days, and the ground was like a mud wrestling pit on late-night TV, only thicker and nastier. "Hurry up!" one of the men yelled, his plea punctuated by a .50 caliber round going down range. Despite the pain in her hands, she hurried. Every time the gun went off meant there was one less round left. That afternoon, she'd carried the last 2 full cans of .50 caliber ammo to the construction site. "I hate to whine here, but the bloody cloth are pitching a fair wobbly out there." Despite the pain in her hands, back, and legs, Lisa laughed at Edwin's turn of phrase. Roughly translated in her mind, he'd said, "I don't want to complain, but the fucking cloth are really freaking out." As she slid the last few feet through the downpour and gloom, she could see Lieutenant Colonel Wilson and another man bodily wrestling an already cut and trimmed tree trunk into its hole. Next to them, another pair of men were using excavation tools to dig another hole. The private who'd helped her drag the tree from the cutting area leaned against the completed palisade and breathed heavily. Lisa dropped on her butt in the mud and tried not to puke. They were all dead on their feet, except Private Lipstitch, of course, who was just plain dead. He'd been torn to pieces by a pair of cloth 3 days ago during the first failed attempt to build the palisade along the edge of the plateau. "How's it going?" Wilson asked Lisa. He was peering through the rain back toward the tree line. They could just barely hear the axes thudding over the pervasive droning of the rain. "The last battery pack for the chainsaws gave out just before we started hauling this one," she told him. "So they're down to axes." He half nodded, half shook his head, and that spoke volumes about their situation. The British man, Abbott, limped over and offered her a bottle of water. It was native, but filtered several ways. They were still getting over the flu-like illness that they'd all had. Edwin guessed it was a local bug, luckily not fatal. "How's the leg?" she asked. "Hurts like a bastard," he admitted as he went back to trimming branches on the newly delivered tree. 2 days earlier, a tree fell the wrong way and pinned him. It was a miracle the tree hadn't crushed or broken the leg. It was also lucky because Private Lipstitch, their medic, was the one killed by the cloth. Now the explorer wielded a hatchet, trimming branches from the trees. While Lisa rested, she observed the work thus far. On his last exploration, Edwin finally figured out how the cloth were getting onto the plateau. A narrow trail zigzagged its way up the plateau's nearly vertical side. As far as they could tell, it was the only way up or down the plateau. Unfortunately, the cloth also knew about it. They had been climbing up, a couple each day. They decided the best way to stop the incursion was to build a wall and block the path. In the early stages of building that wall, they made several discoveries. 1, the cloth could be somewhat stealthy, and 2, the beasts could mount a short wall. The cloth ended Private Lipstitch's life when he was doing a routine inspection of the prior barricade, a half dozen logs stacked horizontally across the trail and secured with rope. The second attempt at a barricade involved cutting trees, digging holes, and creating an old-world-style palisade. Because the ground was solid rock at the edge of the plateau, they had to back away from the edge 100 feet, which meant the palisade needed to be a semicircle with stacked barriers at each end. That required a lot more trees and a lot of holes. During construction, a couple lizards came up each day. They shot them and let them fall to the ground. That proved to be another mistake, because as the rains came, so did hundreds of cloth attracted by their dead brethren. The 1 or 2 a day was a fond memory, as it increased to 10 2 days ago and 15 yesterday. The builders increased their defenses by planting long, sharpened poles in the ground around their work area. The lances made decent deterrents, and several cloth impaled themselves on them. One managed to ram a lance through an eye, killing it instantly. There were a dozen rotting cloth just outside their three-quarters completed palisade, and the monsters were starting to come in force. A drone flight during a brief break in the rain, just before the sun went down the previous night, showed at least 50 of the beasts working their way methodically up the trail. Using electric chainsaws, the workers managed to put dozens of poles in place and lash them together. All they needed to finish was a 10-foot section in the middle. It already bristled with many sharpened lances, but dozens of cloth were up on the plateau assaulting their defenses. Just another 10 to 12 trees, and they would have a complete barricade. Boom! The big 50 caliber fired again. This time she'd seen a monster crawling over its dead brethren to get at the humans. It was a race against time. The exhausted humans versus the unending hunger of the alien predators. "We need more batteries," Wilson said. "It's four bloody miles each way to Fort Eden," Edwin reminded him. His rifle was under a tarp next to the wall, serving as a second line of defense. The men carried their M4 carbines as well, but those were the least effective weapons against their adversaries. "But you're quite right, Colonel. I fear we'll be overrun before we can complete this fortification without those batteries." "I'll go," Lisa volunteered. "My arms are jelly." Wilson considered for a second before nodding. "Very well, but make haste, Sergeant." "Yes, sir," she said. Lisa trotted over to the logging team, grabbed the used batteries, which were stacked in a dry place under a deadfall, took the two off the chainsaws, and set off, slipping, sliding, and squelching through the mud. She hadn't jogged half a mile before she heard the 50 caliber thunder again. The sound helped her stick to her blistering pace. They'd been at the barrier for days, and she'd had next to no sleep in that period. It reminded her of her time in Ranger School. Nonstop work, stress, and simulated life and death situations. This time, they weren't simulations. She reached Fort Eden in 25 minutes, or 6 minutes and 15 seconds per mile. Her pace in Ranger School had been just under 5 minutes with a full pack. She was only carrying her M4 carbine, battle rattle, and a small backpack. That pace would have gotten her a down check, she admonished herself. Seeing the little camp empty was unsettling. It had grown considerably in their weeks on Bellatrix. They now had 5 little cabins, a cooking lean-to, a semi-permanent solar shower, and a pair of half-buried storage shelters. She looked longingly at the solar shower. Being a woman in a combat arm offered some particularly annoying challenges. The distant echo of a booming 50 caliber round reminded her that she didn't have time for luxuries. Lisa trotted over to the polyester shelter she used to house the electronics for the bank of self-aiming solar panels. She unzipped the flap and stuck her head in. Even with overcast and constant rain, the charging system showed 44% output. There were 6 universal 40-volt mil-spec chargers sitting there. She swapped the dead batteries for the good ones, making sure each charger locked in place and flashed red to indicate it was charging properly before zipping the flap back up and heading back to the work site. She only made it a few steps before she stopped and changed course to one of their stores. Inside, she located a box of MRE sandwiches and stuffed them in her pack. There'd been little time to eat in the last few days, and cold, traditional MREs were nearly inedible. Then she was off again. The run back to the work site was just as miserable as the run from it. If anything, it was raining harder. They'd been down the path enough to completely trample the undergrowth into a root and rock-strewn, treacherous mess. She thought more than a few drill instructors would gleefully tell her this was why she'd spent countless hours on the confidence course back in Georgetown, Texas. She knew she was going slower, but she had to concentrate on not breaking an ankle or plummeting into a ravine. They'd used fluorescent spray paint on the trees every 10th of a mile, like they did on freeways back on Earth. She was at 3.5 miles when she heard it, a series of sustained, fully automatic bursts, followed by a loud, sharp crump. "Claymore," she spat, and threw herself into the run. The team had a grand total of 12 claymores, and no hope of more. 8 were set in overlapping kill zones around Fort Eden, and the other 4 were set up by the unfinished palisade. If they'd set one of those off... She cleared the last low hillock. The sound of weapons and came to a skidding stop in the mud. The area around the construction site was in complete pandemonium. At least 2 cloths had cleared the barricade and were rampaging around the plateau. One roared like a T-Rex from a monster movie, lunging and just missing Edwin. The man barely danced clear of the snapping jaws. Spinning around, he shot a pair of huge .455 caliber rounds from his venerable Webley revolver into the beast's face. It roared in rage and pain, a massive spray of its blood covering a portion of the partially completed palisade. Lisa unslung her M4, flipped it to burst, and raced down the hill. She didn't see the third cloth coming at her until it was too late. Chapter break, end of chapter, and we will stop there. When we start back again, we'll be on chapter 26 on May 21st. Thank you all for coming by, spending your time with us, and we will see you again Saturday night at 8. Same bat channel, same bat time, all that fun stuff. And if you like what we're doing, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, please. And share us and tell your friends. Free book, good book. It's getting exciting now. Thanks. Bye.